I'm a little bit scatterbrained. What's new? I know, what's new? Communing with the Lord this morning in the car, I was going over the lesson, just trying to recap things that needed to go, and he impressed me to do something. And I said, Lord, right now, and I'm already here, So I had to go across the street, get some stuff, and come back. Just pray for me that I'll be calm, cool, and collective, and the Lord will have his way with the lesson today. So we're talking about Jonathan this week. And does anybody know what Jonathan's name means? In Hebrew, it means gift of God, or God has chosen. And some of his they said Jonathan, also his name and the qualities of Jonathan were kindness, generosity, and divine blessing. So I have given y'all some letters, and if y'all could come up here, please. Make sure you
You're left out. You want mine? You're rocking my heart.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is it?
Who's got Jay?
Me.
Jay. 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 H.
I know, you need to be right here.
Oh, J-O-N.
Oh, okay.
J-O-N. A. Were you A? T. No, I need a T. A T and an H and an A and an N.
No,
No,
not you yet.
No,
you're with David.
N.
I should know that.
I knew I wasn't
I'm
going
gonna have to put my first right here.
D-A-V-I-D, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay. Are they spelled correctly, Terry?
Yes, Jonathan is spelled correctly.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna talk about Jonathan. So when you think of Jonathan, the first letter is J. What comes to mind?
Jesus.
Art, yes. And when you talk about Jonathan, he was just in how he was in this story today. And when you get to O, what do you think of?
Obedience.
That's right. He was obedient to his father. And when you get to N, what do you think of? Nobility.
That was a good one.
Let's keep it positive, people.
A. What are some words for A?
Awesome.
Okay,
That all
speaking
right.
of Jonathan, he had administrative skills, both in the palace and in the army.
I have a T.
T. What do you think when you think about Jonathan with a T?
I don't know.
He was thankful. He was thankful for his friend David.
And he was also truthful. He was also teachable. And he was tactful. If you remember how he spoke to his dad. And H?
Honorable.
Yes. And he was also heir to the throne. And
A.
A? Achieve. Right. And he was adamant. And also in how Saul just kept on after David, he was adamant. He refused to kill David. And then in.
He was nice to David. He loved David.
And he was not afraid. Jonathan was not afraid to take a stand also. So, might as well get with David. The D, what comes up? He was devoted to God. A, he was admirable, and he was anointed as king also. All these answers are right, I'm just kidding. And he was also accountable to, Kathy, later on. Yes. And then V,
He is victorious.
Victorious.
exactly, that's what I have. And then I.
He was interesting.
He what? He was ingenious also. He was clever. And all he was imaginative and how I shouldn't say imaginative, God is helping me. And then D,
Devoted.
yes. And he was also dependent on God's help and guidance. Thank you, ladies. This is just a little preempt.
Love you.
Y'all did good.
Hey, your cup fell on the floor.
That's mine.
Oh, no, it fell on the floor.
Thank you.
Okay, I got it.
Oh, my kids are always independent.
Yes. So, on page 132 in our book, we see a stethoscope and a little teddy bear. So, our first question is, what did you think you would do when you were growing up?
I was gonna be a ballerina.
Well,
I never took ballet, but I was gonna be one.
I always wanted to be a doctor. And you know how little girls always have playhouses and they have kitchens and all this? Well, mine was a MASH unit. I mean, that's what I wanted to be. And Lord had other plans, but that's what I had in mind. And my grandmother was a teacher, and she kind of wanted me to become a teacher. Well, I didn't want to do that. I wasn't very good in front of people. And I just didn't feel comfortable doing that. So, bless you. Anyone else?
I wanted to be a nurse, and I signed up at St. Joseph Hospital, and they put me in the pediatric section, and there was a little boy there that was adorable. I fell in love with him when I was 18 and thought I knew everything. And his mom had never come to see him that I knew of. So I asked her one day, I said, why haven't you come to see your son? And it made her really mad. And she didn't answer me, she walked off. Well, she went to the director and told the director what I had said. So I got called to the office and I was kicked out of nursing school. Cause that was in my big mouth.
Another along her.
So you know, you're 18 and think you know everything and you don't. It was a hard lesson for me to learn, but it gave me humility. And I really stopped. I ask the Lord every day, guard this tongue and don't let me say anything that will be offensive to you or anyone else. That was a hard lesson for me to learn.
Well,
So
piggyback
you're
on
18
that.
and think you know it all, and you've come to find out you don't know anything.
That's true. I did go for teaching. I had my teaching certificate, and I was in elementary. Well, and I was one of these that you was yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. And we were getting, my class was very well behaved, and when we would line up to go to lunch, all my children were in single file, and they knew what they were supposed to do. And I have one child who, he was very unruly. He had a mouth on him, And I told him, I said, you will not talk to me that way, and I sat him out in the hall. Well, the principal came by and wanted to know why he was sitting out in the hall, and I said, he's not gonna talk to me this way. And he says, well, she took me into the office, and she says, well, I'm sorry, we cannot have you in our school. And I said, all right. And so I left.
Wow.
And, there was, like I said, it's the same way as it is today. You know, the kids have a mouth, they're very unruly, they have no manners, no morals whatsoever, and
They can get away with murder.
exactly.
And you always gotta have just one.
And it just takes,
Just
that's
one
right, it just
to
takes
disrupt,
one,
yeah.
just one, to mess it up. Well, what is it, one spoiled apple?
Yeah.
Yeah, that too.
I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mother, because I didn't have one. Mama worked, and when we came home from school, Daddy was there, and he had cooked supper, and Mama had cleaned house before she went to work, and she worked till 10 at night. She was a manager at a TGNY store.
Yeah.
Little $5
Turtles, girdles, and yo-yos.
Toys, guns, and yo-yos, and they tip you. No, that's what we used to say. Anyway, I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I got to be one for many, many years. But then when the boys went off, you know, that's when I started working and stuff. But it's really important to have a stay-at-home mom.
Yeah,
I think it would turn out a lot different if mom would have been there, you know. Daddy let me get away with murder, but not mom.
daddies do that. They do that. So, you know, everyone wants to tell you what you're going, how you're gonna live your life. And a sound counsel from a godly, respected individual is fine. But all counsel, especially from those immersed in the world, should be carefully weighed in light of God's word. And the culture or society of the world is ever changing. And so what the society experts expects of us is we're gonna be fickle, wishy-washy, or we're just gonna go with the flow. And we know that God never changes, He's the same. Yesterday, today, and forever. And that's in Hebrews 13:8. And when we see God is at work, we can embrace that and join Him. And in the Bible Meets Life, we saw that the author was commenting about families on the legacy. They talked about the Mannings were big in sports, the Bush family was big in politics, and the Ford family was big in the automobile business. People have good intentions, you know, like, this is the way we are, and this is what we are going to do, and this is what is expected of us. However, some families seem to pass on legacies from generation to generation, hopefully because of God's leading. Did you know that the pressure is even on the preacher's sons to continue the ministry? And we look at the preacher's sons. What about Dawson? He went into the military. Alan is a police officer. And Devin is in the Air Force. However, these are also opportunities for outreach. If you think about it. Even us, ladies, even we can be outreach. So I wanted you to remember who we are and why we're here. And that why we're here is the Great Commission. We are to go and make disciples. And that's what we do every day.
Privilege to people coming into my house because I can't drive and I'm on the street today. And I've been able to witness, the Lord has allowed me to witness to different people that have come into my house by sharing God with them and what He's done in my life. And that's such a blessing to me that I can plant the seed and God takes over, because I can't get them to come, but I can plant the seed for Him. So I feel like sometimes I'm His hands and feet, to to letting people know what he's done in my life and for me and how he's taken care of me. So that's a blessing to me. And we could share it no matter where we go. I think I told y'all I was in the grocery store back when I was able to drive and go. And a lady was kind of crying next to me. And I said, I don't know what's going on, but can I pray for you? Well, there were several people standing behind me, and I prayed for her. And then she told me her daughter had cancer, so I prayed for that. Well, the couple behind me, the man said, that was beautiful of you to offer to pray for her. May I pray for you? So he prayed for me,
Oh, wow.
which was a blessing for me. And then the people behind him, they prayed. And we had a prayer service right here on the aisle. You know, and it's how it boomerang is just, that's all of God. That's God, touch of God, you know. So he blesses us anywhere we go if we allow it and listen to him.
That's true. So in this session, we're gonna study the relationship between Jonathan and David. And it seemed that Jonathan was content to play what they call second chair to David and not fighting to follow in his father's footsteps. Jonathan knew his role and he carried out his responsibilities the best of his ability. So let's consider how the culture or society's expectations can define our roles if we are not careful. So the point of our lesson is don't let cultural expectations define your role. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, I just thank you for this day. I thank you for these ladies that are here. And Lord, I just pray as we study Jonathan that we will remember who we are and not what the world wants us to be. In Jesus' name, amen. So our passage is going to be in 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 4, chapter 19, 1 through 4, and 23, 15 through 18. So, we would like to read 1 Samuel 18, 1 through 4. Okay, I'll get you there. Go ahead, Jolie.
Okay, I thought you was saying go ahead. When David had finished speaking with Saul, Jonathan was bound to David in close friendship and loved him as much as he loved himself. Saul kept David with him from that day on and did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as much as himself. Then Jonathan removed the robe he was wearing and gave it to David along with his military tunic, his sword, his bow, and his belt.
Thank you. So, and in the prevailing culture of that time, they had expected Jonathan to be king after his father. However, Jonathan's act of giving the clothes and the ornaments reserved for the heir to the throne made a significant statement of how Jonathan saw his role in his relationship to David. And the Bible states in verse 1 that Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. And they're saying perhaps Jonathan was much older than David, that David kind of took him under his wing and helped him along the way. And because David was still a young man. And it also says that David stayed with him from that day on. And the events that led up to this was they were in the battle with the Philistines in chapters 13 through 15. And there was this big giant in the Philistines whose name was
Goliath.
That is correct. And do you know how long that these armies would come together, you know, get ready for battle, and Goliath would come out and he would shout out to them morning and evening. Do you know how many days this went on?
40 something.
40 days and nights that this man came out and taunted Israel's army. And David, whose brothers were in the army, his father Jesse told him to go bring him some food. So he did. And while he was there, he saw this big giant out there. And he was asking him, why aren't you doing something about it? And he said, look at him. Who's going to do that? You know. And David said, what did David say?
Oh,
I'll
well.
do it, you know? And so Saul heard that, and so he went and he killed. He got 5 smooth stones. And again, you know why he got 5 smooth stones?
Goliath had 4 brothers.
Yes, he had 4 brothers. So if he killed one, if the other one come, he's gonna kill him too. And I thought this was interesting. You know, we've always heard that the stone, when it hit him, it killed him. No, it did not kill him. It knocked him out. David pulled Goliath's sword and cut off his head. That's what killed him. I didn't know that until I was reading and I was going, oh, you know, but that's what killed him. All they did was just stun him, get him down, and then David did kill him. So after that, Saul wanted David to stay with him. It kind of like this is just Renee, a lucky charm, you know. Stay by my side. Keep, you know, you're gonna help me with my battles and we're gonna win. So David also played the harp. And when he played the harp, this soothed Saul. So that was another reason why he wanted him to stay there. And getting back to Jonathan, Jonathan and David made a covenant, and they kind of did it among themselves. And as we've talked about the covenant sacrifices, Donna had showed us how you cut an animal, you walk between it, and you're pledging your allegiance to one another. And until death do you part. And that kind of reminded me of something else. Until death do you part. That's another covenant. And so that's what they did. And Jonathan was willing to give up all his symbols of royalty. And again, do you know why Jonathan could do this? Because he was confident in who he was. And he didn't mind being second in command to David.
You know, the Bible doesn't really say this, but we have to think that that Jonathan had some type of intuition, that he was willing to let go of who he was and let God put in place who God wanted to be ruler after Saul in Israel. Because we see this in the pages. It doesn't explicitly say it, but that Jonathan was just a very unusual person, because when he gives away all his stuff to David, he's saying, I'm giving who I am supposed to be to you. The kingdom now belongs to you. You are going to be the protector of the kingdom, not me.
And as she was saying, that meant that he was giving up his right to the throne.
Mm-hmm.
And his military tunic and weapons also signified him leading the army to giving it to David. And in some of my commentaries, it even said that, I don't know how true it is, that Jonathan knew he had been anointed as king.
Well, there's speculation on
That's
that.
what I'm saying, and some of and I was, okay. I liked it was saying that the qualities, divine blessing, he kind of knew on that.
I think also probably because he saw the behavior of his father. His father wasn't acting like a king.
Mm-hmm.
And he sees David, who David epitomizes what you would look for in a king.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that he made that cognizant understanding that my dad's not acting the way that he should, David is. And so if I was looking for a king, I would want him to look like David and not like Saul.
Right. You know, that's like when we look up to something along that same lines, you know, you've looked up to someone so much, you think, I want to be like them. And you know, and Jonathan wanted to be like his father Saul. However, like she says, he didn't do what in the battle as a king should have done. He should have led them, the Israelites. He should have conquered Goliath. He should have. However, this young boy David did it. So Jonathan kind of changed his affections and opinion toward the real true king, which was David.
I wonder if Jonathan felt, I don't think I could do what David could do. Or I don't think I wanna be what my dad is, or how my dad did things. You know, I wonder if he felt that, it's not me that needs to be the king feeling, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, after seeing it as, you know, as we go further into the scriptures, you know, Jonathan kept seeing what his dad was doing, and this wasn't
Yeah.
the right thing to do.
And more than likely, Jonathan was at the battle with Goliath,
Mhm.
and he did nothing. No one did anything.
Right.
Not a single person until David shows up. So again, you're seeing somebody that is stepping up and doing what the king, like Renee said, what the king should be doing, and the king wasn't doing it. Jonathan nor his brothers were, because he had brothers, were willing to do it either. But David, obviously there was such a something about David that everybody could see, this is the person that I would like leading me. And I think that set up the issue of Saul and David is the jealousy. And Jonathan took what could have been, because he's taking Jonathan's rightful place. Jonathan rightfully should have been the king after Saul, but that's not who God had planned to be king.
I think that, wanted to say that, I think that, Jonathan, in a sense, was the bigger person for, you know,
Mhm.
he saw it, I mean, I'm sure that was of God, the wisdom that he had. And he knew that he wasn't gonna be the one, I mean, he couldn't be the one.
Okay, so our next set of scriptures is in 1 Samuel 19, 1 through 4. Donna?
Saul ordered his son Jonathan and all his servants to kill David, but Saul's son Jonathan liked David very much. So he told him, "My father Saul intends to kill you. Be on your guard in the morning and hide in a secret place and stay there. I'll go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and talk to him about you. When I see what he says, I'll tell you." Jonathan spoke well of David to his father Saul. He said to him, "The king should not sin against his servant David. He hasn't sinned against you. In fact, his actions have been a great advantage to you."
So again, we see Saul's jealousy over David's successes, and this made Saul want to kill him. And we saw last week where he tried to kill him several times with the spear. And you know, he had all these plots against David. In fact, he had one of them, he was the commander of all this army to go to the Philistines and to kill them. And he was hoping that in this battle, David would be killed. But that didn't happen. So then he tried to use his daughter, Michal, or Michael. And that didn't work either, because they all loved David. And that made Saul even angrier. And so he was so angry that he just wanted to kill him. Have you ever been mad enough that you just hated someone so much that you wanted to kill them? You may not have done it physically, but you thought about it. And that's just the same as sin, too. So after reading that, you'd think, okay, Jonathan's going to support what his father wants to be done. But that didn't happen. And I liked how they put it in if you read your book, the lesson about being in the middle of a family tug of war. I thought that was neat. It says, who do you side with? How do you tell that someone you're wrong? And how do you referee between hostile factions, especially when you have deep commitments to people on each side? And I put this one in. No, it was in there. But I was thinking about it. How do siblings agree on the proper care for their parents? So these scriptures show that Saul was very, very irrational. He had no reason to kill David, and he was very respectful and honorable to his father, King Saul, and so was Jonathan. Jonathan loved his father, and when he spoke to him, it was from the heart, and he spoke the truth about David. And Jonathan kept no secrets from David. And I thought that interesting. He loved him enough that he wanted to tell him how his father was going to do it, when his father was going to do it, and he helped him escape.
Because it was the right thing to do.
Exactly.
Well, he made a covenant with David.
Right.
He did not have that covenant with his dad. So that put another level to the relationship, was the covenant.
And you could see how, when you look at it in that light, how brave Jonathan was. He was a military leader himself. He was a leader, but he knew his father was nuts, and he still had, went and talked to him. He knew his dad might
He
kill
knew he
him.
respected him as his father.
And then he helped David too, on top of that, knowing that that was a dangerous move for him to make. It wasn't just, I'm just not gonna do what my dad says because he's a pain in the neck. It was very dangerous. It wasn't like disobeying your parents today.
Right. Well, he tried to talk sense into his father. He's family. He's family now. And so, excuse me.
It had to be hard on Jonathan because not only was he kind of a go-between between Saul and David, but also between his sister. So you've got all these people, and you're trying to keep the peace between all the moving parties. And I can imagine how frustrated that Jonathan probably was at times to try to keep the peace between everybody. No one seemed to be, well, I won't say that David, but Saul wasn't happy, Michael wasn't happy, and Jonathan's just trying to make everybody happy.
No, he was the mediator. And so Jonathan, as he was talking to his father, he was trying to tell him, this current order of you wanting to kill David is a sin. And he said that there was going to be consequences of this action because it says in Deuteronomy 19:10 that the shedding of innocent blood would have led to blood guilt, and which that means that they became unclean by killing a person who did not deserve to die. So Saul did listen to his son and the advice, and he swore that he would never do this again. He would not try to kill David. Ha. That was very short-lived. He tried it again and again and again. So, our last set of scriptures are going to be in 1 Samuel 23, 15 through 18. Who would like to read that?
David was in the wilderness of Ziph and Horesh when he saw that Saul had come out to take his life. When Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and encouraged him in his faith in God, saying, "Don't be afraid, for my father Saul will never lay a hand on you. You yourself will be king over Israel, and I'll be your second in command. Even my father Saul knows it is true." Then the two of them made a covenant in the Lord's presence. Afterward, David remained in Horesh while Jonathan went home.
Okay. when Jonathan's intervention resulted in David returning to Saul's house. But again, Saul tried to kill him. So David took refuge with the prophet Samuel at Ramah. And David knew Saul would not stop pursuing him until he was killed. So even Saul got so angry with Jonathan because he knew his son was trying to save David. And so he even tried to kill his own son. And you'll find that in chapter 20, verses 24 through 42. However, David took matters into his own hands, and he sought refuge in the city of Gath, which is in chapter 21. And I don't know if you remember, Gath was a Philistine city, and this is also where Goliath came from. So, Saul found out about that, and due to David going there, Saul had 85 priests, men, women, children, killed because they were helping David. And they even killed the livestock. So, sadly, from this tragedy, David learned again that he needed to depend on God to escape Saul. And Saul continued to search for David and continued to search. And so David followed God's guidance to move from Kial and stayed in the hill country. And that's in chapter 23, the verses before, 1 through 14. So Jonathan recognized that God was at work in David's life and willingly accepted the role God had given him in that relationship. Jonathan and David had to arm themselves for a battle that they were now facing. And this was not only a physical battle, but it was a spiritual battle. And so Jonathan had to see all this planned from God's perspective, and that God had a calling on David's life, and Jonathan was willing to walk this journey with David, even if it meant turning against his own father. And I don't know, you've heard the saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So, that kind of came to mind with them. So therefore David, they armed themselves emotionally by surrounding themselves with moral support, as we saw in verse 16. Then Saul's son Jonathan came to David in Horesh and encouraged him in his faith in God. And it had to be reassuring to David that Jonathan had no jealousy or envy toward him. And they had made that covenant earlier. That was between the two of them. Well, they made another covenant in the presence of the Lord. And in this covenant, they promised again to look after each other and their descendants. They promised to be supportive and yielded to the will of God in their lives. And as we've said before, Jonathan would never be second in command, but he was content in his supportive role. Jonathan had totally accepted God's will for his situation. Serving in the shadow of someone else does not appeal to society's emphasis on being top dog. Yet Jonathan was fulfilled doing the will of God, and he was at peace. Nothing can compare with the peace of being in God's will for your life, which brought to mind Philippians 4:11, where Paul says, I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. And I like verse 12, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So ladies, will you put aside your pride and let someone else get the glory? Jonathan put aside everything because he not only saw, but also knew that God was working in David's life. So don't let society or the cultural expectations define your role. This week, see if you can encourage a leader. I don't know if you know it or not, but being a leader, it's lonely out there. use support. We can all have a little note, text message, just to let us know that you're thinking about us. And that's what our little prayer requests are. It's just to let you know that we're thinking about you, wanting to do what, if there's anything that I can do for you, let me know. And then write a life mission statement. What are you leaving your children and your children's children? What type of legacy? We all need to think about that. What are you gonna have inscribed on your tombstone? Or what do you, really and truly, what do you want your children to remember you when you're no longer here? And also evaluate your roles. Are you serving in a capacity because somebody wants you to, or because God wants you to? And then stand up for someone. Be intentional to encourage someone and let them know that you have their back. Don't be afraid to publicly take a stand on their behalf. Again, ladies, what I would like you to learn from this lesson is to remember who you are and who we are in Christ. As Jonathan knew his place, I would like for y'all to know what your place is with the Lord.
One thing that, just stood out to me when you said that,